Big cities have become too expensive for what they offer. I don't wake up in a rush anymore. Not because life became easy, not because problems disappeared, but because mornings stopped demanding urgency before I was ready to give it. Coffee cools on its own. The day doesn't shout. There's a pause between waking up and reacting. That pause used to feel impossible. For a long time, living in a big city felt like the only serious option. If you wanted opportunity, you moved closer to it. If you wanted to grow, you accepted compression as the entry fee. Smaller spaces, faster pace, higher costs. It was fine because it was temporary. Or at least that's what we told ourselves. The deal made sense back then. But deals change. And this one changed quietly. When the city stopped being a launchpad and became a treadmill. Big cities were built to concentrate opportunity. That was their advantage. Proximity mattered. Being near meant being early. Being inside meant access. Today, much of that logic no longer holds. Work became portable, knowledge became distributed, coordination went digital. Yet cities kept charging as if proximity were still scarce. Rents rose, transportation slowed, density increased. The price went up, the return didn't. At first, it feels manageable. You adjust, you normalize, you shrink expectations just enough to keep going. But over time, something breaks. Not dramatically, structurally. The slow violence of shrinking space. Let's talk about space, because this is where reality stops being abstract. Apartments got smaller year after year, not by choice, but by constraint. What used to be a starter home became a luxury unit. What used to be temporary became permanent. Bedrooms doubled as offices, kitchens became shared workspaces, living rooms turned into narrow corridors between meetings and sleep. Storage replaced possibility. Everything had to justify its footprint. When space shrinks, life narrows with it. You don't plan as far ahead when you can barely breathe where you are. You don't expand when every square foot costs more than your future feels worth. That's not a mindset problem, it's an environmental one. Paying more to wait longer. Cities still promise speed. What they increasingly deliver is delay. Commutes stretch, trains run full, roads choke. You leave earlier to arrive on time and come back later already spent. Hours disappear into movement that produces nothing but fatigue. An hour here doesn't sound like much, neither does an hour there. But those hours come straight out of energy, out of patience, out of attention. And attention is the currency of good decisions. When your days are fragmented long enough, you stop choosing intentionally. You start reacting. Life becomes something you manage rather than shape. People mistake this exhaustion for personal weakness. It's not. It's systemic inefficiency. Security, stress, and constant calculation. There's another cost cities impose quietly. Vigilance. You calculate routes, you adjust schedules, you think twice, not always because something happened, but because it might. That low-grade alertness never fully turns off. Security becomes conditional. Peace of mind becomes something you buy in pieces. Better neighborhoods, higher rent, longer commutes, more trade-offs. None of this appears on a balance sheet, but all of it shapes behavior, and behavior shapes life outcomes. Why family life feels incompatible with urban reality. This is where the conversation usually turns emotional. It doesn't need to. Forming a family in a big city isn't primarily a question of values anymore. It's a question of feasibility. Children require space. They require routine. They require margin. Cities increasingly offer none of those at a reasonable cost. When housing absorbs a disproportionate share of income, everything else becomes negotiable. Kids get postponed, then postponed again. Eventually, they disappear from the plan. Not out of rejection, out of arithmetic. Across highly urbanized countries, birth rates fell below replacement long ago. Different cultures, same pattern. Dense, expensive environments systematically delay or discourage family formation. The future didn't vanish, it became unaffordable. The myth that this is just modern life. One of the most dangerous assumptions is that this pressure is inevitable, that high cost, low margin, and permanent stress are simply the price of living in the modern world. They're not. They're the price of staying in environments optimized for an older economic logic. Cities didn't adapt as fast as work did. The cost structure stayed, the value structure moved on. People are paying for access that no longer requires presence. And slowly, quietly, many are starting to notice what less dense places actually offer. Leaving a big city isn't about escape, it's about rebalancing inputs and outputs. Less dense places offer what cities used to: space that doesn't punish you, time that isn't constantly interrupted, housing that doesn't consume your future before it arrives. When fixed costs drop, optionality returns. When optionality returns, people think long-term again. They invest, they plan, they build. Remote work didn't create this shift, it enabled it. The interior isn't a fantasy, it's leverage. Living outside dense urban centers doesn't magically solve life, but it removes friction that cities quietly accumulate. Less noise, less waiting, less compression, more continuity between work and life, more control of time. People often underestimate how powerful that is. When your environment stops draining you, effort goes further, focus lasts longer, decisions improve, quality of life rises without requiring constant optimization. That's not romanticism, that's mechanics. A necessary warning. Geography alone won't save you. Moving without restructuring work, habits, and expectations just relocates the problem. Less dense environments amplify outcomes. They reward clarity and expose chaos. Cities buffer disorganization. The interior doesn't. That's why this shift works best when it's intentional, when income is thought through, when structure replaces impulse. The question that changes everything. The wrong question is still, can I afford to live here this year? The right one is harder and more honest. Does this place support the life I want to build over the next 20 years? Not the next promotion, not the next lease, the next chapter. Treating them as default settings for long-term life now comes at a cost most people can't sustain. Space matters. Time matters. Margin matters. Quality of life isn't about aesthetics or trends. It's about whether the environment you're in allows you to expand rather than contract. Big cities became expensive not just in dollars, but in energy, attention, and future possibility. And once you see that clearly, staying or leaving stops being emotional. It becomes a decision.